Good evening and welcome to Chasing the Facts. I'm Sam Chase, your host. Today is June 29th, 2022, and our guest this evening is Mr. Mike Raisbeck. It's not Michael, it's Mike, right?
That's what everybody calls me.
All right, good. So we'll go with Mike Raisbeck, who is the chairman of Chelmsford Planning Board. So Mike, what we usually do to start off the show is we ask our guests to give us a brief biographical sketch, anything you'd like to tell us, and then we'll get into the discussion.
Sure.
So go.
Thank you, Sam. Well, let's see. I've been in town since 1984.
A blow-in, as it were.
A blow-in, as it were. I'm an engineer by training, but also an attorney. I've done both. Engineering's been my primary activity, but I'll tell you, the law is handy to have. I've been involved with the town for some time. I've lost track of how many years I've been a town meeting rep. And
that's easy to do.
Yeah, it is. The years roll by. And I've been involved with the planning board as well for about 10 years. This is my second shot at the chairman. I enjoy it very much. It's a wonderful combination of the law and the engineering, because you have to be an engineer to do this stuff as well, or you used to.
Well, you know, I was going to comment on that, but you've basically covered it, and I've often thought, watching you chair the meetings and just actually be a member of the board, I thought that is a terrific combination to have, the engineering skill, because you've been trained to do two things: think like an engineer and think like a lawyer. Yeah. And both of those things are very apropos relative to the work that the planning board does. So I think, you say it's only been 10 years that you've been on the board?
Something like that. I haven't gone and added it up.
I'm trying to remember a time when I didn't see you as a candidate on there. So it's been a while. Well, that's good. So actually that means you're in your
third or fourth. I had I started as an alternate.
Oh, that's right. It's a 3-year term.
Yes, it's a 3-year term.
That's right. So that's good. So you've been on the board for a number of years and certainly involved in the town administration for much longer than that as a town meeting rep and as a concerned citizen as well. So one of the things that I wanted to get to, and having you on the show tonight, Mike, was I find in talking to residents in town, there seems to be a disconnect between what people think the role of the planning board is and what the planning board can actually do from a statutory and legal standpoint in terms of managing the growth and managing projects. So if we can kind of focus our conversation in that general area, and then of course there's a lot of sub-topics that we want to talk about. So I'm going to let you run with the conversation, because there are a number of things here that we've talked about before the show, and I know you have some ideas, so I'll let you start.
Well, I think the most important concept to get your head around here is that the planning board actually has two very separate and distinct functions. It's got a planning function, and it has a regulatory function, and those are very, very different. For the planning function, the planning board is mandated by state law to come up with a 10-year master plan. Well, maybe it's 11 or 12, but we try to hit 10 years. That lays out a non-binding roadmap for the town in all aspects, not just zoning, not just building, but lots of other things too: agriculture, open space, youth, elderly, you name it, infrastructure. It's all in the master plan. And in fact, we've just finished up the 2020 master plan, which came in a little bit late due to COVID, but I think was a job pretty well done, thanks to George Zaharoulis.
Now, the master plan committee is not directly a subset of the planning board. It is other people. But
it is other people, but it is appointed by and managed by the planning board. Right. And the report comes to the planning board before it goes to the town. Of course, it's now been to the town at town meeting. So that's one area in which the planning board exercises its planning function. The second one is that the planning board is the body that reviews and has public hearings on all zoning bylaw changes. That doesn't mean we create all the proposals. I mean, if a citizen petition involves zoning bylaw, we're still going to have a hearing on it. And that's another planning function. Particularly in the case of the master plan, that's not a binding document at all. It's a suggestion for the town.
That's an important point.
Yeah. I think it is, and we will be following it up because I've just finished appointing a bunch of people for the master plan follow-on to watch us over the next 10 years, and we'll probably get together once a quarter to see how the town is doing. But eventually, that planning evolves into regulation. It gets into the zoning bylaws or in other places. And then we get to the regulatory function of the planning board. And this is where entities come to us, people who are proposing buildings, people who are proposing developments. And we have very specific rules in place to follow to determine whether a project is acceptable, and a limited amount of leeway to help those projects be the best that they can be for the town and for the proponent. This involves primarily special permits. Special permits are created by the zoning bylaws and recognized by Mass statute. And these are situations in which the planning board, and in some cases the ZBA as well.
Zoning Board of Appeals.
Yeah, Zoning Board of Appeals. But I'm speaking here to the planning board type. We look at a project or aspects of a project. People will often come in wanting, something in the parking that requires a special permit, or maybe it's a major business complex, something over 20,000 square feet. That requires a special permit. And there are lots and lots of special permits. And in those situations, it's the job of the planning board to collect facts, not opinions, facts, as best as we can determine them, and determine if the criteria for special permits are met. And these involve a number of things, the good to the town. We look at, in many situations, we look at traffic. We look at some environmental things for major business complexes. There's just a whole list of criteria. They're not binding criteria in the sense that every single one of them has to be a positive checkoff. But on the whole, we look at these and we try to assess the project and the acceptability of a project. And also, another thing we do there is we interpret them, and we work with the proponent who's bringing this project before us, and we try to get things adjusted so that the project is a better match. It's not the only regulatory area that the planning board's got. We also have responsibilities under the subdivision law. And that's when somebody's got a larger tract of land, they're going to put a road in it, they're going to put a bunch of houses in it or something like that. And we have responsibilities under that. And we also have regulatory responsibilities concerning something that's called an ANR. It's a funny concept that's approval not required is what it stands for. And it's when somebody wants to subdivide a piece of land, even if there's no particular reason that they shouldn't do it, they come before us and we say, you don't need approval for this, so here's our approval. Go figure out
That's okay.
how that works. That's how it works, and it's a little bit odd, but it's an ANR. So those are the three areas that we do the most regulatory work. And the way we handle that's quite different. As I said, the regulatory aspects, we have to be guided by the bylaw, what the bylaw requires, what the bylaw says, and by facts that we gather. One of the important ways we gather these facts, but certainly not the only way, is through public hearings. Now, we've had a couple of interesting public hearings recently. You've probably watched a few. Often when you have a project that affects a particular neighborhood, you see a lot of that neighborhood show up and present at the public hearing. And those are rewarding. We get a lot of information from them, but they're also difficult.
Then there are specific legal requirements regarding the public hearing process itself. So maybe you want to talk a little bit about that. If you're scheduling a public hearing on a project, you know, you have to make sure that, you know, the notifications go out and that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
So that everybody in the neighborhood understands that there is something going on near them.
Yeah, that wonderful 300-foot rule.
Exactly.
Anybody within 300 feet, and there are
the abutters to the abutters.
The abutters to the abutters. As assessor, you know how property boundaries
I do know how it works. Yes.
And they all need to be notified. The hearing, of course, needs to be publicly announced, and it's open to anybody in town. It's not just open to abutters. It's open to all residents of the town. And we basically don't want to start our deliberation, certainly not in any formal way, until the public hearing is complete. So we may go 2, 3, 4 planning board meetings, depending on the size of the project. I mean, I don't know how many we'll have on some of the big things like UMass West. We have the public hearings mixed in with input from the proponents and input from that we may request. For example, if a proponent presents a, say, a traffic survey, a traffic study, in certain situations, we will go out and we will get our own expert in this area to do a peer review of it. You know, where something is of major significance, we're likely to go out and find even a third party to give us info. But once we've collected all that, and once we've heard the public and gathered what factual information we can get, we close that public hearing. We do our consideration, and we vote. Running public hearings is a bit complicated because most people don't draw a very strong distinction between giving us fact and giving us opinion, and I don't blame them for not doing that.
Land use issues tend to be emotional.
They tend to be, exactly.
And
they tend to be
people get caught up in that.
Yeah. But we try to get people to stick to facts, and that's what's most helpful to us.
And I think you've given a very good description of the overall process. Let me, I'm going to try to simplify this a little bit for the audience. And I'm not insulting anybody's intelligence. It's just that, you know, there are areas that we're not all experts in all areas, okay? And the purpose of this show is to try to help people understand how things work. So at a very basic level, I'm a developer, and I've moved into town and I've bought 4 acres.
Okay.
And I want to put up an office building.
Okay.
And the area is already zoned commercial. It's already zoned appropriately for the use that I anticipate. And on first view, it looks like everything is 100% and totally consistent with the zoning regulations that apply. So I'm guessing that if I present a project like that to the planning board, I may be in what is termed as a by right situation.
Well, more than that. If what you
can you expand on that for me? So I've done that. Now where am I in terms of I've done everything on the face of it looks like it's A-okay. There's no anomalies. I'm not asking for 45 feet in a 40-foot zone or anything like that. Okay, where am I now?
Well, for starters, if in fact there are no special permits required for this project, which does happen, you may not even have to come to the planning board.
Okay, that's an important
You
point.
can go to the building commissioner in the town is our zoning officer.
Okay, right.
So initial determinations of what the zoning is and what it means are done by the building commissioner. Now, there's an appeal to the ZBA, of course.
Right, but so it's possible that I could go to Jose Negron
Yeah.
and say, here it is, and he looks at it and says, well, wait a minute, you don't even have to go before the planning.
Right. That is quite possible.
And at that point, I'm all set. Now, let's take it to the next level. Okay, I'm the same guy, but now I come in and, I want to, the setback isn't quite right, or maybe I want an extra 5 feet of height, or, any of the number of situations. Right. What happens now? I assume Jose tells me I've got to go before the planning.
Well, he's going to tell you one of two things.
Okay.
He's going to say either, look, this simply isn't allowed under zoning, or he's going to say, this is allowed, but only with a special permit.
Okay, good.
And that's the difference. I mean, if it's simply out and out not allowed, then the answer is no, unless there is some mechanism in the bylaw by which we can grant a waiver or special permit.
So can you be a little bit more specific as to what might trigger a special permit? What variants?
Well, I'll give you a very good example. If the guy's got 4 acres and he's building an office building and it's 19,900 square feet, he doesn't need a major business complex permit, special permit. But if it's 20,100,
bingo,
he's going to need a permit for that. And that we see fairly often on large projects.
But the 20,000 feet would be otherwise allowed.
It would be otherwise allowed in the case of the major business special permit. It basically requires us to concentrate on all of the typical special permit requirements, but in particular on traffic and on environment. Those are the things that are added with a major business complex. And so we'll certainly look at those, and we will look at some of the other things too. We can look to some degree at the financial aspects of a project. We certainly consider it a little bit.
Okay, that's important. Yep.
Who's going to pay for the sidewalk? Is it going to add kids to the school system? It's funny, people have this notion that every residential project is going to add a whole lot of kids to the school system. It's not really true.
No.
A few, but...
Well, I've been in town actually a little bit longer than you. We came in '79, and of course I've watched all kinds of projects. And of course the big thing back in the mid-'80s was Kensington.
Yep.
And everybody said, oh my God, you're going to have to build 2 new schools. Well, that really hasn't been the case.
No.
Even with Kensington, which is a very large
right.
situation. But and you correct me if I'm wrong, but my general perception is that these large housing projects almost never generate the number of school children that a lot of folks think.
A lot of people fear.
Right, right.
I think that's absolutely correct, particularly today. And of course, demographics change and people's desires change and their idea of housing changes. Nowadays, you get things that are, modest-sized condominiums or 1, maybe 2-bedroom apartments. You're getting young professional couples in there. When they finally get around to having kids, and many of them do, they sell the condo and they go buy a house. So you don't see the kids as much. On 40Bs, you see a little bit more because you have people there that probably wouldn't be able to buy a house, but still need some housing. And we try to provide for them.
But the key is that even in a 40B project, not all the units are affordable. It's only a percentage.
Right, and depending on how the particular project is handled and put together. But in general, those projects aren't adding a lot of kids to the school system as far as we can tell, although we certainly ask the question.
The other issue is traffic, and we've heard this many times. And I'll just pick I'll take Grist Mill as an example.
Yeah.
So when that initial thing was going, and it was very controversial. Again, these things tend to be emotional. There it goes. And the situation was that the discussion was, my God, you put a housing project like that in that spot, in an already traffic-challenged area. It's going to be brutal. And of course, that was the discussion. And I thought to myself, well, You know, that might be true if every single one of those residents got in their car and left at the same time.
Right.
But the reality is that doesn't happen.
It doesn't happen, and furthermore...
So has that been your general understanding?
That's been my general understanding, and furthermore, if we're going to talk about that particular project, which I can do because it's, you know,
it's fresh.
Water under the dam or over the bridge, or under the bridge or over the dam.
Dam water.
Yes. A lot of the people in there are retired.
Yes.
If they don't, you know, and they don't have the kind of fixed work schedule.
Correct.
That, you know, us working folk do.
It hasn't seemed to have been a problem, as was predicted by many people.
No, it hasn't been. I mean, occasionally, if there's a big playoff game, I have a little trouble finding parking at the Brick House.
Well, I was
going to
say,
about it.
Brick House might be actually more of a problem.
Oh, I'm sure it is.
You know,
I think it does.
On a situational basis.
Right, on a situational basis.
Right.
Yeah. So that's true. I mean, people, of course, when a new project is proposed of any sort, the people who think they might be affected often have bigger, their fears are bigger than the reality.
Of course.
And I can't blame them for that. That gives them some heightened awareness, and we get good factual data.
And those folks
from them
often will come to your public hearings, and they'll express their opinion.
Right.
And that's fine, but what I've been watching the planning board meetings over the years, most people, I actually marvel at the sophistication and the intelligence of people. I mean, you don't know what anybody's background is, but you get an abutter, and you think, oh, well, this guy's just mad about the project. But then he gets up, and he gives a very reasoned argument with a lot of factual information behind it, and you say, oh, okay.
That's what we need.
He's given the planning board something to chew on.
Exactly.
Right.
And that's what is so valuable to us.
Right.
Is stuff like that. So that gives you a notion there. Gee, what other topic? Oh, I know something that I'd kind of like to talk about.
Go right ahead.
Is overlays.
I was just going to bring that up, but I'm glad you did. Yes, that is a very misunderstood concept generally, so please elaborate.
Okay. Let's say we have an area. We'll take the handy one is the 129 IA area.
Yes.
It is light industrial. That's what's defined. We have definitions for what uses can go in there, a few that can't. And that's regular, ordinary zoning. Anybody can come to us with a project that's based on the underlying zoning. The overlay doesn't take any rights away from anybody. It grants some options that are much more at the discretion of the planning board. So the overlays are a mechanism for making some adjustments if the proponent chooses to, in exchange for giving the planning board a lot more influence in how the details of that project are going to be carried forward.
Now that is what you just said is very important for people to understand.
Yeah.
So the overlay is in addition to the underlying zoning.
Right.
It does not wipe out any of the requirements or the rights that a property owner has under the underlying zoning.
Exactly.
It's in addition to, but something you just said was, it's really also a tool for the planning board.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
So keep going with that.
But I mean,
that's very important.
You come to us with a proposal that you want to do under one of the overlays, say a commercial redevelopment, quite potentially knocking down a building over there and building another one, say up on 129 or in an IA district or in any district where there's an overlay. We're going to start talking about some things we don't always talk about so much, like architecture. What's it going to look like? We want to know what this is going to look like. Ordinarily, we don't dig into architecture, you know, or the looks. We have some limited capabilities.
Now that gives you the discretion to do these things.
Now we got the discretion. Okay, you want something, you want to you know, reduce the parking a little bit because you're really convinced you're not going to need it. And maybe we can land bank some land so it's there if we need it later. But in return for that, you know what we'd like? We'd like some better buffering over here between you and your next door neighbor. Or, you know, we'd like you to, you know, consider some landscaping that goes well beyond what we might ordinarily ask for. It gives us a way to do some negotiating, and I like to believe that the negotiating that we do winds up benefiting both the proponent and the town.
Oh, I think that's the objective.
That's the objective,
right.
and I think by and large, I think we do that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's a very, very important distinction because, again, and I'll tell you, I think I have a pretty good handle on this stuff, but I get confused sometimes listening to the deliberations, and again, you know, sometimes these situations get rather emotional.
Yeah,
and
they do.
So you get a little fog in there, and it tends to cloud your ability to, you know, really discern exactly what's going on. But that's a very, very important point. So. I think the thing that I would like the audience to take away is, number one, the planning board is an elected body. So the voters in the town have direct control over who sits on that board.
They do.
And, you know, if a person sits on the board for 3 years and you watch the meetings and you don't like any of the decisions that that person has signed off on, well, then you do something to
do something about it.
Oppose that person the next time he or she runs for office. A lot of times I find confusion in the town with regard to who has the jurisdiction or the authority over what board. And because you are an independently elected board, you have absolutely no ties to the town manager from a reporting standpoint.
Right, that's absolutely true.
Okay, so people say, well, you know, how can the town manager allow this or that? Well, we have an elected planning board. You, Mr. Citizen Voter, have direct control over that process.
And that's in fact the case. I went and did a little survey to see what planning boards look like around here.
Oh, and yes, amazing.
Let me give you some. Westford has an elected planning board with 5 members.
Appointed by whom?
They're elected.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, elected. Okay.
Chelmsford is elected with 7 plus an alternate, and this alternate thing works very well. It's a good way to bring somebody on board. They can, because as you pointed out earlier, there's a lot to do in the planning board, and it's not all immediately obvious. So with the alternate spends a year, they in certain situations they vote, but they learn, and then they check in. Billerica has an elected board of 7. Lowell has an appointed board of 5 plus 2 associates. Tingsboro is elected 5 plus an alternate. So 5 and 7 are the typical numbers, and they may or may not have alternates. Around here, towns typically, but not in every case, have elected boards.
Concord is appointed.
Concord is appointed.
But they're appointed by an elected body, the selectmen. I think that's very important. That's a distinction.
That's a very good point. Whereas I think in Lowell, the appointment is probably by the city manager. So that's...
Welcome to Massachusetts, folks. 351 little kingdoms all doing the same thing, but doing it differently.
Well, what happened to Enfield? I thought there were 352.
Oh, you know, you might be right.
No, I think that one's under the Quabbin Reservoir now.
Oh, God help us.
God help us,
and we're both old enough to remember that.
Yeah, or darn near.
Darn near, yes.
Certainly, I remember the noise was still going on. Before we completely leave the topic of overload,
we got about a minute, so I'm just giving you a little warning bell.
Thank you. Well, then I'm going to... Boy, this goes by fast.
We'll have you back.
I'd love to.
Yeah, we'll have you back.
But on the overlays, there's a 2-step process. The first part of the process is a hearing to consider whether a project is subject to the overlay.
There you go.
That doesn't have a public hearing, and it's not a complete description of the project. After that, if permission is allowed there, then you go into the regular, you know, special permitting and stuff. And that's where you get your public hearings. People sometimes don't recognize that when we have a hearing on acceptability for overlay, that it doesn't mean by any means that we've decided the project is
That's
a go.
right. And we're going to have to stop there. We're out of time, and we will have Mike back because you know why, folks? This is a topic that interests me a lot, and I'm the host. So we're going to have
Thank you.
Mike
Anytime,
back.
Sam.
Yes.
Anytime.
Thank you very much.